Hello YouTube, my name is New, and today we're going to be doing a bit of a critique on a video essay I saw recently. This is a video titled, Anime Has a Church Problem, Let's Talk About It. This came into my feed a couple weeks ago. I watched through it. It's not too long of a video. I do encourage you to watch through it yourself, either before or after this video, because I will not be playing the thing in its entirety, and I want you to, actually see every point he makes in full so that you can judge for yourself, of course. But the reason I kind of wanted to cover this is because it's a pretty small channel that this one particular video got like 100,000 views all of a sudden, which is way more than they've ever gotten. And so I know it reached a very large audience, more so than his normal intended audience. And I felt like it just didn't provide much substantial, useful information to that audience for them to draw any conclusions from. And so I kind of wanted to go through and pick apart why his arguments just don't work well and what someone who really is curious about this topic should research into, ways they can improve upon this if they want to make their own video essay or just other essay or anything like that on the topic. Just provide you with some more context that you should dig into in order to really properly inform yourself on this subject. So let's go ahead and hit play and see what he has to say.
Anime kinda has a church problem. I've picked up on a pattern and I want to know if you've seen it too. I'll be watching an anime, taking in the characters and the setting, and then BAM! Evil church. And I think, that's a funny coincidence. But then I put on another show and again, BAM! Evil church. BAM! Evil church. BAM! Evil church. Over and over, and I start to think to myself, something's up here and I've got to talk about it. Now, I'm no anime amateur, but when doing research into this video, there was a surprisingly large amount of anime that have this exact issue. Fullmetal Alchemist Father Cornello, Ascendance of a Bookworm's Cathedral, Attack on Titan's Church of the Walls, Fate's Fuyuki Church, and Fire Force's Holy Soul Temple, just to name a few. They're corrupt, have ulterior motives, or in some cases are entirely built on lies. So what gives? Why are there so many evil churches spread throughout the medium? I've come up with 3 different probable reasons to explain why this is happening, and I intend to set the record straight. The first reason...
Okay, so he has this theory that anime has some sort of problem with churches, organized religion. It's constantly depicting them as he says, corrupt, having ulterior motives, and or being built on lies. So this is actually where our first problem with this whole video essay arises. He is assuming that this is actually just a true problem, right? We don't actually have any hard data. He says he did his research by presumably just watching some anime and picking out some examples where there are, as he sees it, evil churches. But we don't have any hard data suggesting that this is, in fact, a widespread problem in anime. We don't have any data showing that the depictions of churches in anime are in any way more negative than they are in any other media, for example. So right off the bat, we're really starting on shaky ground. We're going to run, for the purpose of this video, we're going to run with his assumption, but I do want to point out, if you want to approach this topic, the first thing you should really be doing is looking at, okay, what proportion of anime depicts organized religion or any religion whatsoever, and then break it down into specifically which ones depict organized religion that distinctly resembles probably Christianity, as is what he's going to focus on. And then of those that depict that, which ones depict it in a positive way, which ones depict it in a kind of like morally gray way, and which ones depict it in a objectively negative, corrupt, ulterior motive built on lies kind of way, right? And then once we have all that data, we have to go and we have to say, okay, let's look at American media, movies coming out of Hollywood. What proportion of them depict the church? What depict them in this way? What depict them in that way? Things like that, right? And compare to all sorts of different sources, right? Another important thing would be, a lot of anime that he's talking about here has very strong roots in like traditional European fantasy, right? let's look at that medium and see how the church, whether or not the church is depicted there and how it is depicted there, and see if there's any correlation, right? So these are all things that we really should be actually doing real research into, not just watching some anime and cherry picking, oh, here's some evil churches, right? So that's problem number one. Let's go ahead and let's look at his first point and start talking about what problems it might have.
And probably the most fundamental, is what I call God as a problem. It's a pretty well-known trope that if you're playing a JRPG, the final boss is probably some version of God. This didn't come out of nowhere, however, and the way we got here is actually really fascinating. Have you ever heard the name Friedrich Nietzsche? No.
Hopefully you have heard that name. I'm going to pause the video here. I'm not going to play through his entire argument. I'll give you a quick summary. He is, as you might expect, going to use the God is dead quote. He's not, I don't think, going to horribly mischaracterize Nietzsche's writings where he made that quote. I think he does a pretty decent job of explaining that. The problem with this entire point is that he's going to explain this philosophy that Nietzsche has in regards to the nihilistic movement, and how, you know, man has to become sort of like self-determining and not be reliant on God and all that. But that also creates a problem for us by having that forced upon us, right? He's going to explain all that, and then he's not going to do anything else to connect that to anime or to Japanese culture in general. The connection you have is literally what he said a few seconds ago about, in JRPGs, you often kill God. That's it. That is the entire connection between Nietzsche's writings and anime, and this whole idea that God as a problem is a theme in anime. There's no other substance to this argument. So if we want to make this point, then we need to find, say, some evidence of people who are heavily involved in, I don't know, maybe even way earlier anime productions saying, oh yeah, I was heavily influenced by this guy's ideas. That would be a good base point to say, oh hey, and then these guys influenced these guys, and that influenced these guys, and that's how we got to modern anime. That's something, if you're going to make this point, that you need to do. Another thing would be if you could demonstrate, instead of it being influential on them, just being broadly influential within Japanese society specifically, right? Because anime is largely being produced by Japanese people in Japan. It's going to have whatever cultural aspects that they have in it, right? It will be reflective on their culture and then will be influential on their culture, right? So we need to find where there was some cultural movement in Japan that was heavily influenced by his ideas, and then that cultural movement influenced either another cultural movement and then on so on until it gets to anime, or, you know, directly influenced anime. We aren't presenting any of that, though. We're just blanketly asserting these ideas exist. Anime kind of looks like it follows these ideas, therefore it's influenced by this. That's it, right? And that's just a very poor argument, obviously. We need to establish that logical connection. We don't do that. That is a way that he really should be improving his arguments. So we're going to skip ahead a bit. I've got a timestamp over here. There we go. And we're going to listen to his conclusion real quick and then talk a little bit more.
Therefore, to the Japanese, God appears to be more of a problem to be overcome than a personal and loving creator. To them, he's a distant and vague figure who sets annoying and pointless rules for us to follow, which is in stark contrast to the Christian understanding, which is that God sets rules because he is not a God of chaos, but of order.
Okay, so this is kind of a problematic thing to say, right? He is asserting a belief system onto other people. He's just saying they hold this belief. He has provided us with no evidence to demonstrate that they hold this belief. Nothing else in his argument does this. Again, please, by all means, feel free to watch his video, see if I am in any way misrepresenting that fact or anything else I present in this, but as best as I can tell, he does not provide any evidence for this claim. Right? So if we don't have any evidence that they hold this specific belief about the Christian God, then what we should really assume is just that they probably don't hold any particularly strong beliefs about the Christian God because, as he will say later, only like 1% of the Japanese population follows Christianity. That means 99 out of 100 people probably just don't care. It probably does not affect them in their day-to-day lives. It's just not very influential over there. So why would they hold any particular belief about it, right? Beyond whatever their own religious beliefs might be, if for some reason they are, being trained to come into contact with Christianity and need to have some sort of rebuttal to it, I guess. But I don't expect that is a thing. I don't have any evidence to assume that would be a thing, right? So yeah, just again, things to be cautious of when we are making our arguments. Let's not assume people hold certain beliefs until we have actual evidence that they hold those beliefs. And now we'll continue on from here into his second point. So here we go.
Speaking of order, Japan isn't a huge fan of organized religion. It's no secret that the evil churches in anime tend to be very Catholic-coded. For just one example, the gold and white color palette of these evil religious authorities is very reminiscent of the vestment Catholic priests wear during Christmas and Easter.
Yeah, okay. So, look, the organized religions in anime use iconography, imagery, symbolism that is very evocative of organized Christianity, right? Again, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have any sort of problem with it, right? As I mentioned earlier, he showed a sentence of a bookworm there, for example, that is explicitly set in like a very heavily German-derived area. It is just plainly like Renaissance Europe, right? It's kind of just makes sense that you're going to have in your medieval Europe a church of some kind, some sort of strong religious organization that is very influential, and you're gonna give them a lot of, aesthetics that map onto Catholicism, right? Like that's just kind of par for the course in that kind of fantasy. There's no reason to assume that is there because we are trying to necessarily say something negative about Catholicism so much as it is, I'm doing a medieval European fantasy setting, of course the church is there. And to be fair, A Sentence of a Bookworm does portray, to some extent, aspects of their religious organization in a very negative light. It also portrays it in positive ways other times, so it's a mixed bag. And it's very dependent on, what character is being portrayed. Some characters are bad, some characters are good, right? So yeah, this saying, hey, why are we using this iconography? Well, it may not be because we're specifically trying to attack Christianity. It might just be because Christianity is the obvious thing to reference. It's what everyone's going to understand because we're setting this in medieval Germany, right? Or something that's supposed to be very reminiscent of it. So, and again, when we see it in other things that aren't explicitly, these medieval European fantasy settings, we're still probably going to reference a very Christian iconography often because it is a really large religion that people are going to be aware of, right? And it's an easy that guy's wearing priest robes. He's a priest, right? That means he's a religious person who's influential in a religious organization. It's just a really easy, ingrained in culture touchstone that we can quickly reference. We don't have to explain too much, and people will get what is going on. So it doesn't have to be something sinister. It can be something as simple as, just being ingrained in our culture. So I don't think that this point works as well either. So then we're going to move on a little bit to his second point proper.
They seem so opposed to organized Christianity specifically. The answer might lie in the rise of new religious movement, otherwise known as cults.
Okay, so again, I'm not going to play his full explanation here. We're just going to, give a quick overview of, he's going to talk about cults. He's going to talk about 2 cults in particular and how they have done a lot of really horrible things in Japan and have created some very negative, ideas within Japanese society around these things. And he's saying, oh, they're being conflated with Christianity, and that's a problem. And this is actually probably this is probably the best point that he makes, I think, is talking about the cults. Yeah, the cults are definitely going to, because they are a specifically large problem in Japanese culture, and maybe not seen as much in other cultures, but it is distinct to Japan. It is going to be something that when we have media depicting them, we should assume that it's because of Japan's own problem with cults, right? That's a good point. But this whole, oh, we're conflating them with Christianity, you're going to need to do more to demonstrate that, and just saying, oh, they use this specific iconography is not necessarily enough, because as he points out, some of the, one of the most influential cults in Japan, Happy Science, I believe is the name, right? They derive a lot of their blatantly fabricated religious beliefs from Christianity. They also derive from a few other religions, but they are explicitly derivative of Christianity and will therefore have some Christian iconography going on. So when you depict an evil cult, as they are in your media, and then happen to have some Christian iconography in there, it's not necessarily because you have a problem with Christianity, it's because you have a problem with Happy Science, and you're just depicting them accurately, right? But even all that aside, we're also missing a really important thing here about the origins of Christianity, which is that Christianity itself kind of started as a doomsday cult, as I understand it. This is what I've heard from people who have studied early Christianity. So, massive grain of salt. I am not giving you all of the context. I am not trained in biblical scholarship or anything like that. So definitely don't trust every last thing I say is absolutely 100% true, but my understanding is Christianity kind of starts as a doomsday cult, right? So to say, oh, it's unfair to conflate the two, actually not entirely, right? Obviously, Christianity in the modern day is much larger, right? For one, and has shifted in a lot of dramatic ways. But if you do look at some of the main teachings of Christianity, even to this day, one of its core ideas is built around the second coming, right? That is a doomsday thing. You will oftentimes see people running around saying, repent, repent, the rapture is coming, right? We had this just this year. There were multiple rapture prophecies going on, I think it was TikTok or whatever, right? So you can't fully separate Christianity from doomsday cults and stuff, because it does have its origins there, and it does have those aspects to it. So complaining about these comparisons is kind of silly. It's you do the thing. Stop complaining that you're being portrayed as doing the thing that you do, right? And we'll say that again later in this video, right? All right. So next we are going to move on to his third point and his final point, and this one, it gets a little rough.
It's all there, but this is all just about organized Christianity. Surely our unorganized brothers won't cause us any... Oh. So yeah, the third reason for evil churches in anime is Japanese Protestantism. Before you get up in arms, I want to clarify that this isn't an attack on anyone nor their faith. I'm only exploring the underlying ideas for why anime has so many evil churches, and I can't ignore the German hammer-wielding elephant in the room much as I'd like to in the spirit of charity.
Yeah, big problem here. Don't think I didn't notice the way you said unorganized. That was clearly intended as a slight. And if it wasn't, then I don't know why you said it that way. Also, I'll briefly pause on that. I do find it kind of laughable calling Protestant denominations unorganized. I am familiar, at least with the United Methodist Church, And unorganized is definitely not the term I would use for them. Significantly more decentralized, not necessarily as steeped in specific traditions because, they just don't have the same history as Catholicism. Sure, you can make those points, but unorganized is just a silly statement. So that's and then following that up by saying, it's Protestants' fault that we get a bad rap. But no offense, Protestants. What are you doing, dude? You can't go and say something so blatantly derogatory and then say no offense. That's just do better. Definitely do better on that one. That's not even a problem necessarily with your argument. That's just a failure of that's just a personal failure. So definitely work on that one some. And then as for the point about Protestantism, so he's going to talk a lot here about how, Catholicism got introduced to Japan in the late 1500s, early 1600s, right before they ended up closing off the country. Then he's kind of going to gloss over the whole why it happened, but while the country was closed, there were still Catholic populations within Japan, largely of converts, but also just there was some very minor trade going on still, just not countrywide. And these Catholics were heavily persecuted by the governors of Japan at the time because reasons. Again, he glosses over them. You can look into this history for yourself, but I know at least on one occasion there was a pretty large uprising consisting largely of Catholics that tried to go against the current Japanese government, the shogunate, right? And they got put down brutally. And I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, it's all the Catholics' fault, right? I don't have the full context of why that uprising happened or whatnot, but you can easily imagine why, when the ones who are in power and stay in power because they put down this Catholic uprising, would proceed to have a very negative view of Catholicism, and why that might seep throughout Japanese society. So kind of going, oh, I have no idea why there would be any negative views of us. It must be the Protestants' fault, when there's this very obvious history with some very negative interactions between the two groups, is very, very silly as well. And so we go through this period of Japanese isolation. Eventually, America comes along with the gunboats, forces Japan to reopen its borders and resume, full-fledged trade and stuff with specifically America, but also other Western European powers. Japan looks at the global situation and immediately starts trying to adopt Western technology and Western cultural values because they see what's going on elsewhere in the world and are like, shit, we don't want that happening to us, right? And it worked reasonably well for them. It had some other problems going on, of course, And then we get into World War II and the post-war period. Again, America comes in, and he's going to say at this point that's when Protestantism really gets involved in Japan. He also makes a really interesting point about, the atomic bomb gets dropped on Nagasaki, and Nagasaki was apparently a Catholic stronghold in Japan. And so, what effect did that have on Catholicism's presence in Japan and its influence on their culture, right? That's an interesting thing that should be researched. Good point. He doesn't do anything else other than just mention that it happens, but that would be a cool thing to research and get a better understanding of. So if anyone wants to, look into that, there's a good place to look. So Protestantism comes in. They're more influential than the Catholics now, but they're always bickering with the Catholics. So the Japanese side with the Protestants because they're the more influential group, and they think Catholicism is bad now. That's it. That's his point. And it makes us all look bad because we're always bickering with each other, right? And it's I mean, maybe that has some influence, but again, we need to, like, it would really help to provide some evidence where, Japanese people are commenting on this divide they see between Catholicism and Protestantism, right? And, what is their actual perception on it, rather than just assuming and forcing this idea that they hold this perception onto them without any of that evidence. And also, like I said, we're completely glossing over reasons that Catholicism might be negatively viewed by the Japanese people, specifically given their historical connection to each other, as well as once America gets there and brings in the Protestantism, how much information did they get about why does Protestantism exist, right? Obviously, Protestants do make contact with Japan before the country goes full isolationist, I believe. I don't know the extent. I'm not very familiar with that history necessarily, so definitely if you know any historians who do know stuff about that, ask them how much influence was there and how much they understood about the Protestant Catholic divide going on in Europe and all that. But yeah, if you sit there and you're a Japanese person who's like, wait, how do you two you're the same religion, but you're different. What's going on there? And then someone starts explaining to you the Protestant Reformation and how and why it started. You're going to go, oh, okay, I see. Like, we're just going to gloss over the part where the Protestant Reformation very much happened for reasons of corruption and stuff in the church, right? Like that. And we're going to gloss over that a few times even, right? So there's a lot to be desired from this whole argument. And yeah, just don't sit here and deflect the blame onto your quote unquote religious brothers while you completely disparage them. Just do better on that point. So then he's going to get a bit sermony here. But I kind of want to just go over some of his final points and then talk about some other things that may have been missed in the process of him making this video, other places that you can start digging to try and understand, is there a trend of negative depictions of churches in anime, or, just religion in general, and why might that be? So let's go ahead and move on to his sort of closing remarks. So we're going to start right here with this.
Well, for one, you need to understand that these depictions are inspired by a total mischaracterization of the Catholic Church.
Right, so he's saying, like I said, this is a sermon. This is mainly to what I presume is his predominantly Catholic audience, and he's like, why is anime like this? Well, it's a mischaracterization, right? He's saying that their religious beliefs are being completely mischaracterized, right? And then not even a minute later, he's going to say this.
There have, admittedly, been many occasions when the hierarchy of the church has failed on moral matters. All manner of scandal, greed, corruption, adultery, pride, and power plays have plagued the church from the time of the New Testament to the present day, though this is to be expected when it's made up of sinners. There is none righteous, no, not one, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. The Lord Jesus once told the apostles that they would sit upon 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. 12. This means that Judas was counted in that plan. But just like how the corruption and betrayal of Judas doesn't invalidate the truth of Christianity, the evil of certain bishops, priests, or even popes doesn't invalidate the truth that the church is the body of Christ.
Right. So it's a complete mischaracterization of Christianity to show, or specifically Catholicism, to show it as being corrupt, having ulterior motives. Some of their beliefs maybe being just outright hypocrisy or even built on lies. But ignore the part where we have absolutely had a history of having all those problems. Because, you see, sure, we have those problems, but what we believe is this, and you should judge us on our beliefs, right? This is just... To put this into perspective, if you don't already see what a terrible argument this is, someone comes up and punches you in the face and then says, no, you don't get to assume that I'm an asshole because I just punched you in the face for no reason. Because you see, I believe in the love and acceptance of everyone, right? Like, no, you're absolutely right to assume that they are an unjustified belligerent asshole, right? They punched you in the face for no reason. You don't judge them on what they say their beliefs are. You judge them on their actions and how they live out their beliefs. So this whole, we're being mischaracterized because this is what we believe. No, terrible argument. Do not make that argument. Genuinely do better again. And this is something interesting about his video. I was expecting in this whole sermon bit for him to go, what we need to do as Catholics is prove them wrong through our actions. And he doesn't say that at all. Instead, he says, what you need to do when they assume this about you is know that you believe this and therefore they're wrong. Right? Like, and that's really weird to me. Every time that I've been exposed to, Christians talking about, the negative perception they may have in society, it's always, well, we need to do better. We need to live better. We need to prove them wrong with how we live. Right? So to not hear that is very surprising, especially given the point he just made. Like, I feel like it's such an obvious point to make of, that's not who we should be, therefore let's live up to our ideals more. Which only further goes to show, like, when we're depicting people like this as, being less than what they claim to be, it's not inaccurate. You yourself are being less than what you claim to be, right? So, yeah. That's pretty much his video. That's most of the problems with it. Some other problems to keep in mind, other things that we could have addressed. So Christianity has some influence on Japanese culture, of course, right? It is like the largest religion in the world. It's only natural it's going to have some influence. But there's a couple other religions that are also heavily influential on Japanese culture. Obviously, Shinto being the native religion of Japan. But also Buddhism, I believe, has been very highly influential, and we do see both of these depicted in some ways in Japanese media, specifically anime. And so I think, and this is also something he kind of missed an opportunity by not drawing comparisons to the depictions of what he sees as Christianity to the depictions of those other two, because I think generally those other two are going to get more positive depictions than his organized religion being Christianity depictions, right? And that would have been a really interesting thing to delve into of, like, is there actually a significant difference in how they're portrayed? And if so, why does that difference exist? What historical factors led to this, right? What amount of this is just, obviously with Shintoism, it's what they were originally there, what was originally there. It's what naturally developed in their culture, and it's thoroughly ingrained in their culture, and that's why it's depicted that way, right? Versus Buddhism and Christianity coming in later. And there were conflicts with Buddhism when it came in, as if I remember correctly. So yeah, that's an interesting thing to consider as well. So that was pretty much the big one that got left out. But there are plenty of other factors. Like I said, you should be looking at what other media has influenced anime. You should be looking, in that same regard, you should be looking at what other countries and cultures have directly had influence on Japan historically and how that might affect things. Anime itself, as I understand it, kind of comes out of Japan really liking, like, Disney cartoons and stuff, right? So let's look at how that influences anime culture, right? So all these things, these are all ways we could make this video better, make a better video ourselves if we were trying to, do our own video essay on this topic. These are all things to keep in mind. Hopefully this video was was more informative for you than his own video, and hopefully it has left you with a lot to think about and consider, and maybe you want to go do some research on your own now. One way or another, I hope you have a good one, and I'll see you in the next video.